Greetings and welcome to Lit with Lloyd. I am your host, Lloyd Russell, and my guest tonight is Tim Myers, who is, and I quote, writer, storyteller, songwriter, and teacher. We will explore many of those things, maybe even all of them. Welcome, Tim, and thanks for taking the time to do this.
Lloyd, I am so grateful to you. I should be thanking you. This is wonderful. I haven't seen you personally for a long time, which is a thrill, and it's also great to do the show, so thank you.
Good. All right. That could be my first thank you, so I appreciate that. Okay. I want to start with something that might not be what exactly you were thinking of talking about. However, is there anybody in your family that might be writing a book that's going to be coming out?
So just today, my daughter, I came in the little office in our house where she works. She lives with us for Bay Area rent reasons. And the entire floor of the room was covered with piles of multicolored index cards. This is because my daughter's working on the rewrite of a book, which Lloyd very kindly is asking about, that's been accepted for publication. It's a crime novel.
Wow.
She's very much a writer and is deeply involved in it. And that's going to be coming out, we hope, in the fall. So we'll see. But I mean, it's like, my daughter's like, Dad, Mom, is it okay if I leave these things? We're going, of course. I love living in a house with index cards all over the floor of a room. Yeah. Well,
I do know a little bit about what you're going through because Josh, had a children's book that was published.
Exactly.
So fortunately it was not about crime since it was about his son, but it's an exciting thing as a parent to go through that.
Yeah, two proud papas. That's what we've got here. Yeah,
I think that's so cool.
It's so cool.
Yeah. All right. So let me ask you a few things about yourself. How many years have you been writing, and how did you get started writing books? We'll talk about the genres in a minute.
It's funny because I was a teacher educator for almost 20 years. And one of the things we would often do, which is important for people who are looking for that as a profession, is ask them why they want to become teachers. And time and again, there would be students who would write, I knew I wanted to be a teacher when I was in 4th grade, 5th grade. But it wasn't always true. So I'm one of those people who had no idea I was a writer when I was young. It just kind of happened. It happened in what I think is a very beautiful way. But I wasn't one of those people who just had it in my head from the beginning. In fact, so what happened is I went to a Catholic grade school in Colorado Springs, and we had an assignment. The teacher said to write an essay or something, and we all turned them in. For some reason, Lloyd, again, at the time, I had no idea. This was pure impulse in a kid. And I wasn't a scholarly kid. I got an F in 2nd grade in reading comprehension, which drives my reading comprehension specialist wife crazy now.
Grades in 2nd grade?
This is this is okay. Old school.
Another story.
Yeah, another story. Yeah, I could tell you stories about that. So I wasn't that kid. I was goofy and I wasn't interested in school or anything like that. And so I wrote this poem, which was about Saint Stephen the Martyr, of all things. He's the guy who got shot with all the arrows. And the next day she said, okay, boys and girls, it's time for recess. Tim, will you stay behind and talk to me? And of course I was like, holy crap, I'm in so much trouble. My first thought was, education those days, I didn't follow directions. But she said, and I'm standing there just shaking in my corduroys, and she says, Tim, you know that poem you wrote? And I was like, yes, sister. She said, I liked it. And honest to God, I can still remember, Lloyd, to this day, I almost fell over, right? And she encouraged me, so I wrote more poems, and she put them in a little booklet. And this was just amazing. And this is I never thanked her. I was too young, and she's long dead now, but I would give my eye teeth to thank her. That was the spark that lit the fire. Even then, it took me a long time. I just started, and I was following my impulse and all that kind of thing. But that's actually when it started. And I'm really happy to tell that story because this is a teacher who just lit somebody up.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. So other than a book of poetry or a folder of poetry, when did you decide to actually write a book?
That's such an interesting question because you'd think it would have a simple answer. But again, I don't know exactly why I am the way I am about this and the way I was. I often say that I became an artist the way an apple ripens. The apple doesn't think about ripening. It just hangs there and ripens. So, the next year my mom bought this old upright piano. I took piano lessons for about 4 weeks, hated it, and then started playing the piano on my own too. And I had no idea. I hadn't shown any interest in this. There was no... And so little by little, I just kept doing these things more and more. I kept writing things. By the time I was in high school, I was writing down lyrics to songs and writing more poems. But I had the thought of publishing or submitting it didn't enter my mind for decades. I won a third place in a high school poetry contest when I was a junior, and that kind of woke me up too, because it was the first time I'd ever done anything since Sister Boniface was her name, where somebody else had responded to it. But again, I just kept doing it. And of course, one of the things you hear from writers all the time is they feel very loath to call themselves writers. By the way, there's a certain group of people who are happy to call themselves writers, and they spend a lot of time on social media talking about how they're writers, less writing is going on there. But real writers they don't want to claim something they don't think they've earned. So I couldn't call myself a poet for years. I mean, it's almost like AA. Hi, I'm Tim. I'm a poet. I have to actually make myself say it. But so anyway, it kept going on, and at some point, and I was a late bloomer too, is a big part of it. But the first children's book I ever published was 1990. So I was fairly old at the time. I don't want to do the math because I'm terrible at that. But and I'd entered a few little contests in the meantime. I had family, my wife and I are very committed parents. I stayed home with my kids twice. We were working, and when you're teaching, there's a huge time commitment. I was a coach for 10 years along with that, which means even more. So in other words, I was always keeping a journal. I always had things going, but it took a long time to form, and it just kind of ripened. But 1990 is when it started.
And why children's books?
I'll tell you, it's funny. There are two reasons. I was always a writer. This happens to a lot of people when they're young. In fact, it happened with my daughter. They're writing things for their age when they're young, so you think that they're interested in that genre at that level. Well, they're only doing that because that's their reality. So my daughter was a YA writer when she was a young adult, but as she got older, she still wrote her reality, which meant there were books for adults. So I can remember children's writing. I had this amazing moment where, well, it's something, because that's been a kind of pattern for me. I was an adult writer, because at that point I was an adult, and everything I was writing for adults, it never crossed my mind to write for kids or teenagers. Never crossed my mind. So my sons were born, and we used to tell stories. I used to tell them stories, and we'd go to the library every week and max out the number of books we could get. And I'd read to them, because we knew it was important for their reading. So one day I pull out this one book that we just pulled off the shelves, and I read it to my sons. It takes about 5 minutes. At the beginning of that 5 minutes, Lloyd, I was not a children's writer. At the end of that 5 minutes, I was.
Whoa.
And I remember when I closed that book, I just went, oh my God, you can do this with children's books? Maurice Sendak, Where the Wild Things Are. I still think it's a literary masterpiece. To me, that is a book that is a genre masterpiece, the genre being children's.
Absolutely.
And the other reason was totally practical. Teaching, family, coaching, all that stuff. Children's books, I thought, at least I can get those finished. I've got time enough to write short things. So I could write poetry, I could write songs, and I could write children's books, because these were things I could get finished, which is one of the reasons I'm now writing my first novel at my very advanced age, even though I have file cabinets full of multiple novel ideas, many of which are highly developed. But it was this question of how much time are you going to have for that size of a project? And it just went that way. So there was a very inspirational reason, and there was a very practical reason.
All right, so side note, in case you don't know this, and I'm sure I've said this on air more than once, Maurice Sendak originally wanted to write a book called Where the Wild Horses Are. Do you know this?
I've heard about this, yeah.
And he couldn't draw a horse. Is that the most amazing transformation of all time?
It is. Plus, I can't believe that Maurice Sendak couldn't draw a horse.
I know.
That guy could draw naked babies floating through over a milk bottle. I mean, that's an amazing story.
But it's one of my favorite pieces of trivia, literary trivia.
But I mean, that book is so great. I love trivia about it. It's one of those things where learning more about him and what he thought and everything is absolutely worth it. And that book, by the way, is an absolutely stunning piece of poetry. I mean, just the text is stunning. It is evergreen to me. Every time I read it, and it's like 56 words or something. I mean, and he did a lot of other things that are amazing too. But I'm trying at this moment to recapture, which is easy to do, this incandescent thrill I had at reading that book to my kids. By the way, I'm 2 pages into that book, and I'm like, I'm not even paying attention to my sons, and I come to the scene where no words, no text.
Yep.
Where they're all,
Yep.
Like worshiping the moon, and I thought the bottom of my soul was just going to fall out. I mean, that is such a potent, multi-layered, symbolic, and yet, I mean, it's all of that, and yet it hits kids right where they live, right? So this was one of these things I can see now that led me to other deep interest in genre, where you have these, what I call transrealist works, fantasy or whatever, that are able to do something just superlative and powerful, but be very popular and mainstream, like the great folktales and myths, which I have a huge interest in.
Well, it also reminds me of authors like Pat Conroy, who could write so well but still be readable.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
So that's who I always think of when I, somebody that is so literary, and yet he's not getting Pulitzer prizes for being literary.
Right, that's right.
And then everybody can enjoy his books.
And that's that spectrum is always there for writers. I want to work at both ends of that spectrum. I mean, I have some weird, surreal ideas for books, and I have some very straightforward. In fact, the novel I'm working on now, I'm very purposely putting it in kind of the grand action story mode, but I also want it to be like Farewell to Arms is a war novel, but it's also so much more. Yeah. So again, I like that whole range, but some people obviously are against the readable end of the spectrum, and I don't have that disdain at all.
Well, I'll have you know that my 2-year-old grandson loves Where the Wild Things Are.
Well, yeah, this is what he's 2 years old. I'm 68, and we're both going, we love this book.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a marvel. That's a marvel.
Yeah. Side note, I'm older than you.
Okay. Glad we got that out of the way.
Yeah. How many children's books have you written, and when was the first one that you actually published, and how were you published?
So my first one was in 1990. I found it's a Hawaiian book. We had gone to Hawaii. Actually, before we got to Hawaii, I knew that there was a fish in Hawaii. It's a state fish, if I'm remembering right, called the huma huma nuka nuka apawa, which nobody who I knew had ever heard of. Maybe Californians know more about this. And when we got to Hawaii, I found out there's another fish called the lau vili vili nuka nuka oi oi. And my writer brain just went, oh my God, okay, what if the huma huma nuka nuka apawa got married to the lau vili vili nuka nuka oi oi? What would they ever name their kid? And I was like, bingo, there it is, right? And so I got it published by a small Hawaiian press. Right? So that was wonderful. The number of children's books I've written is probably, I mean, I don't know for sure, but if easily 200, probably more.
Really?
But, well, again, children's books, you can sit down and bang out a children's book in an afternoon. I know, but that's
still a lot of books.
Well, it is, and I'm a person who loves to work and loves to write, so it's that kind of thing. But it's and I guess part of that too is I always think of cottonwoods. Cottonwood is like when June comes and you start seeing the comas with the seeds in them. The cottonwood, like a lot of trees, its whole reproductive strategy is send out a gazillion, and some of them will land. So this is kind of what I've always done with art, is I've just produced a lot, and then you see what's the best and see what you can do with it, right? But yeah, no. In fact, I have a tub in my office, this big, one of those orange bins that's this full of children's book ideas, and I got a lot more in other places too. A lot of them are in folders and stuff, so I never have any problem with that. It's funny though. I always laugh about this because if that sounded like a boast, it was not. It is one thing to say somebody is precocious. I was never precocious. I started in 5th grade, but 6th grade, I guess it was. But I am prolific. But when you say, people go, oh, what a prolific author. I'm like, there are people in mental institutions who are prolific. It all depends on the quality. Just because you write a whole bunch of stuff doesn't mean any of it's any good. So I'm very prolific because I love it so much. Whether it's good or not is not for me to judge, that kind of thing.
Can I buy all 200? Are they all in?
Oh, no, they're not published. Those are, no, I have 20, so I have like 24 traditionally published children's books, and I have 3 or 4 more that have been turned into ebooks by Cricket because they originally appeared in one of the Cricket magazines. So those are the published ones. No, published, yeah, that's a whole different thing.
Okay.
Cottonwood, only a few of them land. Yeah.
And your first book was published by the small press in Hawaii. What about your follow-up? So how did they get published?
I've been published by all over the place. What happened then was I wrote Basho and the Fox, which actually probably is the biggest response I've ever gotten. It's the weirdest thing in the world, but I'm actually a New York Times bestseller for children's books.
How cool is that?
Well, it's not as cool as it may sound financially because it lasted for one weekend. In the book industry, we have a weird situation that you don't have in a lot of other industries, which is returns. So Daniel Pinkwater, who was a very famous writer at the time, came on Morning Edition with Steve Inskeep, I think it was, and read my book aloud. And
oh wow!
And he told my editor, when I bring a book to Morning Edition, it'll sell 40,000 copies. Well, it sold a bunch. I mean, it went to bookstores, but it didn't sell that much. So I was gone. I made a little money, very little money, but that publisher started taking more books from me, and I can't remember. I think 2 or 3 or 4 books with them.
Okay.
And then I'm always, another thing you do if you're a writer is you're always looking for publishers. So I landed a bunch of books with other publishers. Almost all of my I shouldn't say almost all of my publishers have been absolutely wonderful. I got really lucky with that. You run into problems with publishers sometimes. Like I got a verbal commitment once from a publisher stringing me along for 6 months when another guy comes in and says, sorry, we're not going to do it. But that kind of stuff just happens.
Yeah.
My publishers have been great. So yeah, I'm all over the place. Let's put it that way.
And are you still getting books published, or has it been a while since you've published your last children's book?
It has been a little while. Those 3 ebooks came out, and that was done by Cricket. I didn't do that. So I've had something every year, but I'm definitely I'm not publishing as much as I was before. And the biggest reason for that, I hope, is that I realized that it was long past time for me to jump into these big projects. So I jumped into 2 huge projects, which are this novel, by the way. It's funny because when I started writing it, I thought, why did you pick this for your first novel? It's a fantasy young adult series. So the world building that's involved in this is huge. And then the other one is a musical, it's my other big project. So that's also huge. It's a lot of work. But I mean, I'm just as happy as a lark that I get to work on it. But it's a big time commitment, let's say.
Yeah. All right. I want to get back into that. We're going to take a quick break, and then we shall return with Tim Myers.
Thank you to the City of Montecito for their continued support of KCAT Public Media. The City of Montecito has enabled KCAT to inspire, educate, entertain, and inform our community through the magic of television and digital media for over 38 years. Thank you.
Okay, and we are back with Tim Myers. Before we ended that first segment, you indicated that you're working on 2 big projects. One of them being a novel, an actual, you said a crime novel?
A fantasy novel.
Oh, you did. You said That's exactly what you said. It's a fantasy novel. By the way, and I mean this sincerely, one of my all-time favorite books is a young adult fantasy. There's absolute, it's never about the genre, it's about the writing.
I could not agree more, Lloyd. That is absolutely perfect. And in my mind, this goes back to exactly what I'm saying about Where the Wild Things Are. Like you said, your 2-year-old nephew, is that what you said?
Grandson,
right? Here I am at my age, he's 2 years old. We meet in this text, in this story.
Yeah.
So Ursula Le Guin is one of my favorite writers and long has been, and I love her work and I use it as a model, but I also deeply admire her and I'm grateful to her for what the inroads she made in the big, official literary community with her work, because she got all these huge awards and she's the one who started breaking the glass ceiling for the genre writers. Now, plenty of genre. Okay, so in the fall, I'm actually going to be teaching genre lit at Santa Clara University for the first time. I've been teaching children's and young people's lit, and so now I'm going to teach genre fiction. I can't wait to do it. I'm just fascinated with it, particularly because there still are these lingering ideas about genre, like romance, like mystery and crime, like Westerns, like science fiction, like fantasy, all these different things, alternative history, as being lesser works. Now, to me, it's just amazing when you think about it. I call it the disappearing genre phenomenon. Somebody writes a book, a near future book about a dystopic society where there's government control, complete media control, and this is about the deepest political issues. It's called 1984 by George Orwell. Oh, that's a novel. Wait a minute. That's a science fiction novel. That's a near future science fiction novel. As soon as it gets really good in a literary way, then the genre part is lost in the minds of many people. And there are many, many examples like that, right? So my young adult fantasy, if Maurice Sendak can do it, by the way, not comparing myself to Maurice Sendak, but if he can bridge that 2-year-old to 68-year-old, then I think I can write a book that will work for young adults and for adults. And the interesting thing is, as you probably know, you see different numbers, but huge numbers of adults are reading work for young adults. I mean, you see as much as 50, 60, 70% of these books are being read by adults, not by young people. So what we have there, like you said, it's about the story. It's about the writing. Again, and people are really pushing the boundaries in young adult fiction right now, too, in a lot of ways. So it's a really, to me, this is a huge, what do I want to say? There's something very holistic about this kind of literature if you do it right, which just thrills me to no end, the possibilities for that.
I think that's great. I mean, for me, it's all about a writer making me, allowing me, convincing me to make an emotional connection, because you can't dictate that.
No.
And I've read, as we all have, some of the biggest novels across the country, around the world. They've done nothing for me. So I don't blame the author. It's not about the author, but this young adult fantasy, I mean, it was about two young women that went back and forth, and at the end of every chapter, I said, "Oh no, the chapter's over," and then I would say the same thing the next time. That's what it is. Our book club, we've counted, has done somewhere between 35 and 40 different genres.
That's awesome.
And of course, you'll be on there when your book is completed.
This is what I want to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so where are you in the novel? What is the timing roughly? I'm not trying to hurry you.
No.
But do you have a sense of when it'll be ready to send out to publishers, or are you going to get an agent? How's it going to work?
So I love the question, actually. And one of the reasons I love the question is because there's kind of an iceberg phenomenon that I'm at right now. I have just finished chapter 1. It's going to be 10 chapters. Just the last couple of days, I started working on chapter 2. So you could say, well, you've finished a 10th, and that's just a draft, because obviously I'm going to revise and revise and revise.
Right.
And I hope I don't have to do one of those Michael Chabon Yiddish policeman unions thing where he had this whole world and had the whole thing, and then he threw out his entire story and started over with the new story. I mean, this kind of thing.
No kidding. But
so you could say, well, you're a tenth of the way done. Well, because of world building, I'm probably 70% done with this book because of all the years of world building that I've done and all the work I've done to get that world building stuff organized. So I still have, like, on one of my bookcases in my room, I've got a shelf like this, all paper. I'm still a paper in this stuff, right? And another one about 3/4 of the way, and all of that part I knew I was going to do.
Yeah, first time.
Yeah, exactly. All of that is for this book and subsequent books and the world building stuff. So I've done a huge amount of work for that. My hope is that I can get this thing done by the end of the summer, which is blisteringly fast for a lot of writers.
Yeah.
Because I want to do more work on the musical, and I'm collaborating with a wonderful colleague of mine. We're having her students perform parts of the musical as we write it. So that's the hope.
Okay. Well, let's digress then to the musical. I mean, you are a songwriter.
Happy to, yeah.
And how long have you been teaching at SCU, which is my alma mater, by the way?
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, I went to grad school there.
Go Broncos. What'd you get your degree in?
In law, actually.
In law, wow.
Which I never went into.
I was going to say, have I given you any litigious possibilities here tonight?
We'll have to ask Shan.
I said your plaid shirt was cool. Yeah, ask Shan. It's one of those things. This is something that came late in life to me, and I kind of just hit myself in the head with it. Actually, the original impetus for this was I'm deeply concerned with the problem with the broken revenue model in the music industry. I think, different opinions about this, but Spotify and other people have done a great job in stopping piracy, not all of it, but most of it. However, there are millions of Spotify users that are on free tier, which in my opinion, and again, people disagree, that constitutes legal piracy. These are people who are getting music for nothing. If all of those people were paying, which would be a hard sell, by the way, we'd have more money to pay people because at Spotify stream, the rate per stream per song is really low. It's like 0.000006 cent of a cent for each stream, right? So I was thinking about this because I'm a songwriter, and I'm wondering how that whole thing could work out. I mean, it is quite possible today for people to have significant success, not Ariana Grande, Death Cab for Cutie level success, but significant success and make almost no money. And I suddenly thought, well, one thing you could do is you could write a show. Because if you write a musical, people have to come to you because they come for the show.
Yeah.
I mean, they could obviously steal the music if they wanted or whatever. And then I thought, Tim, my website, my personal, God, this sounds like a perfect transition to plugging my website. It isn't. I didn't mean
Hey, this is what we're doing here.
My website is tmyerstorysong.com. I mean, and I chose that because that represents me, story song. And I was like, Tim, story, song, it's called a musical. And I started thinking about a musical, and now I have a number of ideas, and I'm working on this one. And Lloyd, the way it goes is you never know anything you do as an artist is ever going to have any success. I mean, the odds are against you. By the way, this is a musical. I mean, we have wonderful, wonderful regional theater around here. Obviously, my ultimate goal would be to get it on Broadway. But what is the likelihood of me actually getting a musical performed? It is extremely low. Well, you go on to it with faith, and you have faith in yourself and confidence in what you can do. And I'm saying I really like the way it's turning out now. And I've also seen part of it staged by students. And so I can see how it works on stage. So, I'm going to keep working on it. And it's just, oh my God, it's so fun.
Wow.
It's so fun. Putting it together is just, it's work, but it's really fun.
Have you done songwriting prior to this?
Years and years of songwriting.
Huh.
Oh, yeah.
And were they just for your own benefit, or?
Well, no, and I've always wanted to do something with them. But again, here's one of my things. I am a monogamist in life and a polygamist in art. And I'm a randy damn polygamist when it comes to art, right? So storytelling and songwriting and writing, and then I also recently, this is the end of it for me, it's my last whole new area to work in, but I've been doing a lot of visual art lately, which I kind of put on the back burner for years, right? So as a strategy, this is probably one of the stupidest approaches to a life in the arts that you could possibly. Why would I split myself 4 ways and try to? And I've asked myself that question many times. And again, it's kind of like, okay, should I ask this woman to marry me? She drinks too much. This is not a reflection on anybody real, particularly not my wife. She drinks too much. She owes a lot of money. I shouldn't. This is not rational. Oh my God, I love her. It's that kind of thing. So I couldn't resist all these things. I just couldn't resist. And being super busy for a long time and not being able to work at the level I wanted to was another huge factor. But I'm just like, hey, we're all going to die. I want to live a life that's worthy. I want to live a life that has this shimmering meaning for me. And so I'm just going to keep pushing. And if it comes through, great. If it doesn't, I lived.
Yeah. I think that's great.
Yeah.
All right. I want to get back to your books for a moment.
Sure.
So you've talked about, roughly a couple dozen children's books that you have had published. But a book that I absolutely loved was Glad to Be Dad, A Call to Fatherhood.
How nice of you
Love
to
that
mention
book.
that.
So tell us about that.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm thinking about that book these days a lot is things keep coming up. I keep reading things. I hear people talking to them about family, about gender, about husbands and wives or partners. Obviously, not everybody's hetero. These things keep coming up, and we still have this hugely complicated mess in the way our society does family. Now, my parents were old school Catholic conformists, and that world was set up for them. I'm the oldest of 11 kids, by the way.
Whoa.
Yeah. So if you think of what my mom and dad had to do to keep us housed, clothed, fed, in school.
Wow.
But it was one thing they had this very clear division of labor. Domestic was all her. Work and money was all him. Well, the whole world is set up that way because that's been such a common pattern. Not every culture does it that way, and there have been some changes. And by the way, we're going through a lot of changes in America and a lot of other places. But we still have that problem. So one of the things, this is the kind of thing that come up. You're reading the newspaper in 2022, and it says, well, women still do, a much higher percentage of the housework on average than men do when the wife and the husband are both working or both partners are working. By the way, what I've read recently is if same-sex couples are better at this, they divide this labor more equitably, right? But I'm like, okay, so that's not right. She's working full-time. He's working full-time. She's doing more housework? That's not fair, right? So I'm like, read my book. My book is about how you make this transition and the funny parts of it and the serious parts of it. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. It's one of those things where I put a lot into it. I'm very proud of it. It has sold basically nothing.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, this is the way it goes. What does it take to get out there, right? So I'm very satisfied about writing that book. And this is what I always say too. For writers or artists in general, the whole thing is a circle. I love what you said about you're reading this YA novel and this thing just gets you and you don't want the chapters to end. There's that moment. This is the thing that's like the engine of art, is one human being is meeting another human being in a work of art. And if they really meet, something magic happens, something powerful, which is happening for you in that book.
Right.
So I want this book to get out there and do that, but it's not connecting. And you never know what's going to make it connect and what's not going to make it connect. So I always say, as the artist, I draw half the circle. As the reader or viewer or listener, you draw the other half.
Uh-huh.
Well, I can't worry about the other half. All I can control is my half. So I'm just going to keep drawing my half a circle and hope that my circles all come whole. And when that happens, again, that's incredible. That's very hard to describe just how beautiful and powerful that is.
That's an interesting analogy. I certainly have never thought of it that way. So the book did not sell particularly well?
It's still out there. My wonderful publisher, Familius Books, Christopher Robinson, he believes in leaving books out there, but it just did not sell. And most of my books have not sold. I mean, this is just the way it is. Books that I'm really proud of, they sell or they don't sell. And of course, so what we try to do as artists is that we try to promote ourselves. And if we're lucky, we get invited on a wonderful show like this and we can, put the word out there. But you never know what's going to connect.
Yeah, I understand that.
That's life.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so we got the novel coming out or being finished.
I love the way you're like, when is this book going to be out? So my book, I'm like, oh my God, Lloyd, I could put all this work into this thing and nobody could accept it. I mean, this is what you're dealing with, right?
Yeah. Well, just so you know, I would be happy to be an early reader.
Oh, thank you.
Of the book, because I love that stuff.
I'll take you up on that.
Great. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. That pretty much does it for us. It was great having you. Certainly great to see you again, but great having you on the show. And we're closing the book on today's podcast. I want to thank Tim for being on the show. I want to thank KCAT always for their support and supervision and technical expertise. And we will definitely see you next time. Thanks.
You just heard Lit with Lloyd here on KCAT Radio. Explore all our KCAT original programming at kcat.org/radio.